Good evening and welcome to the Big Cat Cafe. Friday nights at the Big Cat Cafe with Elizabeth Ellen Carter and Duncan Carling-Rodgers.
Hello. Tonight we're going to be chatting about history.
I love history.
Elizabeth loves history, as probably evidenced by the amount of history which can be found in her first two novels, the second of which is about to be released in November. Tell us a little bit about your research, Elizabeth.
Oh, I've been doing a lot of research. The medieval period is really interesting because a lot of people labour under the misapprehension that it was basically dark, dirty, dingy, dull and stupid. But it was really an interesting period. It was when the contemporary universities were founded.
I had my doubts that it was actually possible to create a romance set during the medieval period, simply because I kind of thought, well, it's all too nasty and brutal. And it came as some surprise that you were able to bring it to life in the way that you did.
Well, it's because you've got to start with people, and that is the particular advantage of writing romance, because the entire essence of romance is the developing relationship between your hero and heroine. So once you get their personalities, once you know who they are as people, then you just put them in the setting in which they were born. To these characters, there's nothing abnormal about swinging around a broadsword or living in a Moat and Bailey Norman keep. For the upcoming compendium of short stories that you've taken part in, you actually did some research into lighthouses, didn't you? I did. A Season to Remember is a series of 4 short stories written by myself, Suzanne Bellamy, Noelle Clark, who's not feeling well. I hope she's feeling better, so a big shout out to her, and Eva Scott. 2 of them are set contemporary. Noelle's goes back to the 60s. Eva's is set in modern day. Suzanne Bellamy's is 500 years in the future. Mine is set in the early 19th century, and I did a bit of research into lighthouses and how they worked.
They ran on clockwork back then, didn't they?
Yeah, they did, which was really interesting. Of course, the big lens required something that would be easy to work with. Even though the concept of clockwork has been around for a while, what they had to do was to float it on mercury. Now, mercury is obviously we know it's a deadly substance, but it also has a high densities, which means you can put something heavy on it and it floats.
What does it have to be? Does it have to be flat to float on it? Stop the mercury squashing out of the way?
Yeah, and my understanding is it's in a sealed unit, and because of that, you wind it up over several periods in a night, and the lens would rotate on the float of mercury.
So what you're saying is that the lighthouse keeper would have to get up at several times during the night to go and wind the lighthouse up.
Well, that's it, but at least he could get a little bit of shut-eye. Prior to that, the only thing you could do is have a constantly lit beacon,
right? Okay.
which would be on all night, and of course that could be extinguished with wind and rain, or it could be extinguished by somebody with malevolent intent.
But the fact of the matter is that the lighthouse keeper, if he nodded off and overslept, then the lighthouse would wind down, and it might end up sort of just doing something useless like pointing back inland.
That is an excellent point.
Talking of shining a light in the wrong places, there's an author who actually has a few things to say about that, doesn't she?
That's it. Hello to Nicole Hurley-Moore. She's an absolutely fabulous author and lovely lady. She did a post a little while ago talking about history, and this quote really resonated with me from Nicole. History was something that happened back then, in a time where people weren't so civilized as if we are now, or generally not so clever, an idea bandied about by 19th century scholars. Oh, there are a few exceptions, but really no one could ever be as clever as them. Now, I've always loved history, especially the medieval kind, but even my resolve was pushed. One teacher, who was a lovely woman, but would barely speak to us, she would divide the chalkboard in half and begin writing the entire lesson, 50 minutes of ceaseless writing. Oh, and once she got to the end of the board, she would rub it off and keep writing. It's interesting because I was talking to a young man I know, and I was talking to him about some of the historical themes in both Moonstone Obsession and Warrior Surrender.
Which, of course, are the titles of your two novels.
That's right. And Eliot said, why can't you teach us history? This is really interesting. When I learn history at school, it's boring. And I find that to be a real shame.
Do they actually still teach history at school?
Allegedly, but I mean, I think it's always been a disposable subject, which I find disappointing and disturbing, because I'm fully of the opinion that, to quote Edmund Burke, those who don't learn from history are condemned to repeat it.
What were the challenges inherent in the differences between writing about the medieval period for Warrior Surrender and writing about the much later period, the late 1700s, for Moonstone Obsession?
Well, again, I come back to the earlier point that I made, that once you've got your characters and you know their personalities, the history then comes into providing almost like the set dressing for the universe in which they live.
What are the things that you do with respect to research that help you find the things that you need to know?
Knowing how to search effectively on the internet is absolutely vital, and it is surprising how many people, even though some young people have grown up not knowing life without computer and the internet, don't know how to do basic research skills. It helps if you can actually describe what it is that you're looking for, such as medieval lighting. Just follow the links, and you've just got to do a lot of reading.
In other literary news this week, Thriller of the Year, Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn is being made into a movie. She mentions that people couldn't put it down, and she knows of someone who went round and round on the London Underground until they finished it. But the story mentions author Gillian Flynn, a fan since girlhood of Alfred Hitchcock's unsettling masterpiece Psycho, didn't want only to hear stories of how people were so enthralled to her book that they shut themselves off from the outside world. She wanted evidence that it was messing with their heads and making them look at their own spouses through new suspicious eyes. And she got that evidence from her own cousin, who, having read the book, reported that when her husband suggested taking her away on a luxurious holiday, her first thought was perhaps he was plotting to murder her.
Good grief.
Quote, "That's exactly my goal, to make spouses look askance at each other," Flynn has said of her cousin's admission. What do you think of that, Elizabeth?
You know what? I think that's really sad. And I think that speaks volumes about the author herself. That she wants to make spouses look askance at one another. The question I've got to ask is why? Couples should be in one another's corner. They should be loving and supportive and on the same team.
This has been Friday Night at the Big Cat Cafe with Duncan Carling-Rodgers
And Elizabeth Ellen Carter.
Thank you very much for listening, and good night.
Good night.